Outrage sells comics? Doesn't look like that to me. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Recently, comic book writer Joshua Williamson said that Outrage sells comics. And Joshua Williamson further went on to say that when comic book readers are angry, they spend more money when they are happy. Now, I'm going to have to disagree with Joshua Williamson on this statement because as someone who has over a decade of experience running a publishing company, I can tell you from my perspective as a trade publisher that Outrage doesn't sell product when it comes to trade publishing. No, Outrage is what alienates customers and makes it where they're not interested in buying anything. And examples of this can be shown with the recent book published by Kyle Rittenhouse, which came out to a lot of controversy and outrage, but did not sell many copies and basically was a flop. And then there was the book If I Did It by O.J. Simpson, which came out back in the mid-2000s, I believe, and basically couldn't sell a copy. Yes, the book created a lot of outrage because it was O.J. Simpson presenting a alleged hypothetical situation of if he did kill Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, but the outrage was so bad that the publisher HarperCollins couldn't sell any of those books, and it basically led to Judith Regan, the woman who acquired this book, losing her job. So Outrage really doesn't sell books in trade publishing. No, with trade publishing, people don't really want Outrage because Outrage alienates customers before they have a chance to buy a product. However, those in the comic book industry do not understand this, and a lot of the people like Joshua Williamson don't understand this because they haven't been given any sort of context as related to the history of comics and how they are published. Now, Joshua Williamson basically is coming from the perspective of someone who worked at DC Comics under Dan Didio when he was the publisher and president of DC Comics, and Dan Didio basically created a culture of outrage ever since he came in charge of DC Comics in 2002. Now, Dan Didio, when he came into DC Comics in 2002, was someone who did not have any publishing experience, and because he didn't have any publishing experience, what he thought he could do was sensationalize things like he did in Hollywood where he used to work, and he thought that this would generate sales as related to comics. Now, before Dan Didio was in charge of DC Comics was actually doing very well with many books like Batman and Batman-related titles selling in the mid-six figures at 250,000 to 100,000 copies, and those books were doing exceptionally well when you consider publishing. And many other books like Superman and Green Lantern, again, doing very well until he came along. And when he started putting out his Outrage-style comics, this is where we started to see a precipitous decline in the sales at DC Comics, starting with the event Graduation Day, where Donna Troy wound up losing her life. And then we had Identity Crisis, a storyline that alienated a lot of readers because it revised a satellite-era Justice League, which happened in the 70s, telling people events that happened did not happen, and put together a scenario where Sue Dibney, the wife of the Elongated Man, was sexually violated, and members of the Justice League wanted to cover it up. And that story alienated lots of customers, starting DC's sales decline because people were outraged about how this story was just so bad and how it just went against the canon of DC Comics. And as that story came out and got published, it started a further decline, which continued on with other stories like Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, and stories like what led up to the Flashpoint and the New 52. And we had Dan Didio out here creating a lot of Outrage, but Outrage really was not selling comics because each passing year that Dan Didio was in charge, sales continued to decline, proving that the whole Outrage model wasn't working. And the Outrage model wasn't working mainly because it was creating a lot of bad word of mouth. And in publishing, you need word of mouth to generate sales, because with books, you have to be able to create a word of mouth among readers who have a satisfying reading experience to generate the interest in the book from other readers. Because if somebody reads a book and enjoys it and tells their friends, guess what? That leads to other people heading over to Amazon.com to pick up the book. And it also leads to people looking to go into bookstores like Barnes & Noble to pick up the book and take it home to read it for themselves. So you need to generate word of mouth. Unfortunately, when it comes to comics, they don't know how to generate word of mouth that's positive, because you have a lot of people who have learned a lot of bad habits as related to marketing comics. Now, because Dan Didio was in charge of comics for a good 16 to 17 years, what has happened is you've got people like Joshua Williamson who have not learned proper technique for writing stories or marketing them. And because he hasn't learned proper technique, what he's taking are the bad habits he learned at DC Comics under Dan Didio. And as he's taking those bad habits with him, what he's doing is thinking that this is how you sell product. But this is not how you sell product. No, if Joshua Williamson were to have worked in trade publishing like I currently am now, he would understand the proper way to sell a book is by word of mouth. And you want to generate good word of mouth, because good word of mouth, what it does is it gets people to start to feel good about the book because they've got a friend telling them that the book is good, and that creates positive energy. And that positive energy is what gives people that whole enthusiasm and starts to get them anticipating picking up that book. And that's what's going to get you the sales that you need. You generate sales through good word of mouth. You don't generate sales through outrage. No, outrage is what drives people away from books, but Joshua Williamson did not learn this because he did not learn proper technique for marketing books, because he was mentored by a dysfunctional person. And that's one of the big problems that has impacted the comic book industry, is you've got a lot of people who learned bad habits over the last 30 years, and they've learned bad habits because you have inexperienced people teaching other inexperienced people the little that they think they know. And sadly, it's basically like what is said in the Bible about the blind leading the blind. And what's happening is the comic book industry currently is in a ditch because you have inexperienced people teaching other inexperienced people about the business. And as those inexperienced people come into the business, what they do is think that the approaches that they learned are the ones that work, but they are the ones that are actually hurting the business. And they're hurting the business because you're generating all of this controversy that creates a lot of clickbait articles and gets a lot of people talking on social media, but it does not go out and build that anticipation that gets people out here looking to buy the next book. Because building that anticipation to sell the next book is done two ways from my experience. One, it is done with a great teaser that gets people excited about the product, and that's something I try to do with my teaser ads, which is what I do before I launch a book, 90 days before it. I drop a teaser that lets people know, hey, this book is coming. And then after they see the teaser with the cover on it, and I start talking about the book, that starts to build people's excitement for the book. And as I'm doing that, what I'm doing is building that anticipation of people to pick up the book and buy it either in paperback or digital format. And I also build up a lot of excitement by making sure that the previous story was exciting and ended on an up note where the hero is ready to take on the next journey. This is how I sell books like the ISIS series, the Steam series, and the John Haynes series, and even books like the Spencerella trilogy or my vampire novel, Eternal Night. I want to build up that excitement for that next book, and I want to get people excited to the point where they want to say, hey, I want to pick that up. I mean, I even do this with my nonfiction books like The Man Crisis, The Woman Crisis, and my Stop Simping books. I want to build that excitement because I want to offer the reader something, and I want to either offer them an action-packed adventure with my fiction, or I want to offer them a solution with my nonfiction. I want to offer the customer something other than a problem. And that's what happens with Outrage comics. Yes, they make a lot of controversy, but what they're doing actually is selling people a problem. And if you sell people a problem, they're not going to be interested in buying a product because problems are something people already have. And when it comes to things like comic books, you want to sell people a solution because solutions are what people buy. People have no incentive to buy a book that is filled with problems, filled with characters who are miserable. People don't like to sit there and deal with somebody who's doing worse than they are, just as bad. No, they buy books to get an escape from their problems, and as they get that escape from their problems, what they're looking for from these heroes is a solution that will save them in their personal lives. That's what people want when they buy a comic. They want a solution, but sadly, you've got guys like Joshua Williamson who think, oh, people buy books because they get angry. No, the last thing you want is an angry customer, because angry customers don't buy product. Happy customers buy product. And I can tell you that from personal experience. I had been buying comics ever since the mid-1980s, and I was buying lots more comics when I was happy, because I would go to read these books for an escape before I went to school, and I was buying a lot of comics in the 80s. But what really stopped me from buying comics in the 90s was, one, I didn't have a job, so I couldn't afford to pay for them anymore, and two, a lot of those stories around 95, 96, especially over at Marvel, like The Crossing, basically were so bad that it made me want to not buy any more product. So what makes people not buy product are people trying to go out here and do things like gaslight you, like they did with Identity Crisis and The Crossing, or giving us these super dark stories where it's nothing but death and mayhem. That's not going to give me incentive to buy a book. No, and it doesn't give customers incentive to buy a book. And this is what a guy like Joshua Williamson would have learned had he worked with a seasoned publisher like myself, or somebody with publishing experience to tell them how books are actually sold. Because yes, the controversy that is created by these books with this outrage, yes, it'll generate a lot of clicks for these clickbait articles on places like Comic Book Resources and many of these other websites, but it's not going to generate a lot of sales. No, it's not going to go out here and incentivize people to go out here and go look for that book or ask their retailer to stock that book. That's not going to give them an incentive to get that book or even order it online like I do sometimes. No, you want to generate strong word of mouth, because word of mouth is how you sell product. Word of mouth is how books have been sold for over a century, and word of mouth is how a publisher generates all of their sales. I mean, over the last 10 years I've been running SJS Direct. What really sells some books is the word of mouth, and word of mouth can get a book a lot more sales than if you were to go out here and generate bad press. So when I'm out here And I've done books like John Haynes' A Conversation with Death. I mean, that was a book that I just did just to start the John Haynes series. I wasn't really expecting much for that book, but that book turned out to be a huge hit because people liked the story and they told other people about the story. And as they were told about the story, they picked up the back books like The Man Who Rules the World and The Temptation of John Haynes. And then they came back for the other books in the John Haynes series like Dark Succubus, The Man with Nothing to Lose, Taking Care of Business, At Death's Door, and all other books like the upcoming John Haynes Illuminati. And I've seen it happen with the Esteem series where people went out here, and the ISIS series where they come back and pick up the back books, and some people come back and pick up the entire run. And again, that's all due to good word of mouth, which is something a publisher has to do. They have to understand that selling books is not about outrage. It's about forming a relationship with the customer. And it's about forming that relationship with the customer where they feel like they can trust you to produce fun and fantastic stories. That's what a publisher's job is to do. Foster that relationship between themselves and the reader, and not go out here and alienate the reader by trying to go out here and shock and awe those who really are not passionate about comics. And that's one of the big problems I'm seeing with this whole statement that Joshua Williamson made. It shows me that there's a culture of dysfunction inside of DC Comics, because outrage is never something it should be anything anybody should be planning to generate in order to sell books, because it's clear to me that Joshua Williamson comes from a place from, again, the perspective of Dan Didio, but not the perspective of people like Jeanette Kahn or Jim Shooter, or even people like myself who have that background in bit publishing, who can tell you that selling books is all about generating good press, generating a business that creates a positive energy, and fostering a relationship with the reader where you're looking to provide them with a fun and positive experience, because people want that fun and positive experience because they've already got enough hardship in their life, and seeing something that makes them angry doesn't make them want to buy anything. No, if you want to get people buying comics, you want to get them to smile, you want them to feel some sort of excitement, you want them to feel some sort of anticipation. That's what got me buying comics back when I was a teenager. You want to get people happy about your product, and you want to see happy people, because happy people tend to buy more because they're in a more relaxed mood. This is what I've learned from watching retailers. They talk about, well, this is why they play soft music inside of malls. This is why they have bright colors everywhere. They want to get you to relax. They want you to get away from your stresses. They want you to feel a way about things, and they want to give you that break. But the reason why the comic book industry isn't selling anything is because, again, you're selling me a problem. You're giving me stress. I've already got enough stress, and that's not going to sell books. And what's sad here is that people are learning a culture of dysfunction. And until that culture is broken, you're going to have people who are blind leading the blind, and you're going to have an industry that continues to remain in a ditch. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can pick up a paper copy on Lulu.com right now by clicking the link in the description box, and you'll be able to pick up that comic for the same price as it was in the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to pick up some of the positive black fiction and fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find the books of the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my vampire novel Eternal Night, my black sorority novel The Thetas, my black business novel A Recipe for Success, and my nonfiction on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find it at other online booksellers in digital format like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and you can also find other paperback copies at other online booksellers like Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you'd like to help me be able to put together my next SJS Direct comic, You can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.